come off that top, he come grooving up slowly. He got jewel to eyeball, he won holy rolling. He got head down to his knees. Got to be a joker, he just do what he please. Come together right now over me. You've waited long enough. It's time, people. This is the Beatles episode. Welcome to Pop Culture Catechism, conversations about music, movies, and the longings of the human heart. Let's get started. When the world seems like it's pressing in, how do you get by? How do you get past the fear of loss or pain? How do you really connect with another person, especially if you've been hurt before? What if you've never known a healthy relationship or healthy love in the first place? How do we have real love and intimacy and relationship with others? How do we have real intimacy and relationship with God in a world that is so broken? When I find myself in times of trouble, what do I do? These are all questions that we find throughout the music of probably the biggest band of all time, the Beatles. A lot of times on this show, we talk about whatever is happening and trending right now, but sometimes we take a look back on the greats, on the classics, and who have influenced generations of musicians and artists. And today, I can't think of a bigger, more influential artist than the Beatles. My name is Mike Tenney. I'm a Catholic speaker and worship leader from Washington, D.C. I spent over a decade teaching Catholic high school theology and also trying to make it big as a rock star at night. And now I'm blessed to speak and lead music for thousands of people each year at events all over the place and through this show, Pop Culture Catechism. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Dom Quaglia, Catholic speaker and also big Beatles fan. So he's going to be on the show, and I really think you're going to like what he has to say. This is Pop Culture Catechism. If it's your first time here, this is the gospel according to pop music and movies, where we take a deep dive into the music and the movies that you are plugged into. So then when we're done and we unplug from our earbuds and our phones and our tablets, that we can go out in the real world and we can know God's love better and we can live God's love better. Special thank you to our patrons who make this show possible through popculturecatechism.com. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to have a little bit better grasp of how to know God's love and live God's love in this world. I would like to welcome to the show, Dom Quaglia. Dom, how are you?
Mike, I'm so good, man. It's good to chat with you. It's been a while since I've seen you, and I'm just really happy to be here and to talk about the Beatles, no less. Very exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's nice when I get to have a guest on the show that I've actually met in person. You and I got to meet at the National Catholic Youth Conference briefly last year. And we've been following each other for a while. Every once in a while, we'll send each other a message about something. So, and my good friend, Benjamin Jude, who was on the show, one of my first shows from the beginning, he's like, you got to get Dom on the show. He's just so good. Just get him on. So I've been meaning to have you on for a while. Yeah. So shout out to Jude, and glad to have you here. Tell us about yourself. You're a Catholic speaker, and tell us who you are.
Yeah. So I have been speaking at kind of random events around different places in the church. Gosh, I think I'm going on like 10 years of doing that. And it was never really my intention. I just kind of started doing it for fun, and then it just sort of picked up. And before I knew it, it was like what I was doing with my time. So I've been really, really blessed over the last like 10 years or so to travel the world speaking to people. And I still do it, but I've kind of started to slow down, in my older age of 30 or 31, I think I am now. I decided to slow down a little bit. So I still do it like a couple times a month, but I'm also doing real estate, and I'm trying to invest more in my wife's career. She's a musician. So I'm trying to spend a little bit more of my time kind of with her and all that. So kind of entering into a new phase. I feel like COVID was a transition point for a lot of people to just kind of figure out, am I going to keep doing exactly what I was doing, or is this a good time to switch things up? So I'm kind of in the middle of one of those periods, but speaking to people is still like my number one passion. So I love that I get to do it. It's a joy.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love getting to do it too. Yeah, and COVID definitely threw a wrench in the whole speaking thing. So
yeah.
And your wife for people that don't know, Dom's wife is Sarah Kroger. She's awesome Catholic musician, part of the Village Lights, which is a Christian band with Ike Ndolo and Ricky Vasquez. Ricky's going to be on the show. I don't know if his show will be out before this or after this, but Ricky's coming on the show. I'm filming with him next week. So,
oh, very cool, awesome.
Yeah, it should be fun. And you sit in with them sometimes, right? You play guitar also as well.
Yeah. I play a little bit of acoustic guitar. A little bit of bass if the bassist can't be there, but Sarah's got an awesome band. Her music director Zoran is a complete genius with putting and not just a musician but worshiper. Like he's a really, really good worshiping music director. So that band is just so much fun to play in because it's like a group of really talented musicians who also like to do worship stuff, which is really cool, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love getting to play with good music. My I call him my drummer, Brian Wilson. He was on our John Mayer episode. I always say he's my drummer, but really I'm his worship leader because he's like way better than me.
I get that.
All right, cool. Well, let's talk about the Beatles. If you don't know who the Beatles are, get out from under the rock you're living under, people. You should know who the Beatles are. They were an English rock band formed in Liverpool in 1960, composed of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. This is from Wikipedia. They are regarded as the most influential band of all times and were integral to the development of the 1960s counterculture and popular music's recognition as an art form. There's just, you can't say enough about the Beatles. They're just huge. They have tons of they have entire albums of like their number ones, you know. You could fit on like you'd take like 2 CDs to fit all the number one records they have. So I actually, no hate on my parents, but my parents actually didn't like introduce me that much to the Beatles. They were very into like folk stuff, John Denver, and my mom was into Motown, but I actually listened to like very little of the Beatles. And it wasn't till I got older and all my musician friends were like, what? You don't know the Beatles? Here, listen to this. Here, listen to this. So I still feel like I'm a little bit of a newbie getting into the Beatles, but tell me, what do you love about them? What is great about the Beatles? Why are they such a big deal?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer. It's funny because right now there is so much information on the Beatles, definitely more information than there ever has been, just in terms of like documentaries and all that. It's a really interesting story right now. And then I'm not sure which platform it's on, but there's, you know, that show where Paul McCartney is talking with Rick Rubin and they're going through songs and they're at the board. So they're like, you know, highlighting different parts and like kind of ISOing like a vocal or a bass line or something. And Paul McCartney's just explaining the songs. And in the midst of that, I kind of rediscovered why I love the Beatles, which is that they just did things nobody else was doing. You know, and they were so influenced by other people. Like they're constantly saying, oh, we took that little riff idea from this band, or we took this sort of drum idea from this band. But they're not shy about that. They were influenced by people, but then they took that and they took risks. They did stuff that nobody else was doing. They blended sounds together. You know, they would have a rock and roll song that would kind of go into a waltz in the bridge for no reason. And they just were, it was just the most free flowing kind of creative genius that I feel like I've heard in a long time. And there's obviously a lot of great artists and a lot of great bands, but the Beatles sort of made a song for everybody. You know, I don't know if you could find somebody who doesn't like a single Beatles song, because they just kind of covered the whole musical world, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like they were one of the first bands to do that. Like I feel nowadays, if you've been an artist for long enough, it's kind of expected that your albums are going to have a different feel and almost a different genre. Like, what is Taylor's next album going to sound like? What is Beyonce's next album going to sound like? What's Ed's next album going to sound like? And before the Beatles, it was like, well, what's Elvis's next album going to sound like? It's going to sound like Elvis, you know. What's you know, it was people tended to stay in their lane a little bit more, I think. And the Beatles were the first group, probably with the advent of television, that was big enough to be like, well, we're going to just do something completely off the wall. And because we're the Beatles, we can do it and people will buy it anyway, you know, and then people will learn to like that. And we can kind of reinvent ourselves from album to album. And so I feel like they really paved the way for a lot of other artists to have that freedom to step outside of their genre and go beyond. So.
Totally. I can imagine artists arguing with their label about wanting to do something and being able to say, well, the Beatles did it and it worked, so let us try it. You know, I'd imagine that was used a lot.
Yeah. It's like, well, son, you're not the Beatles is probably the response to me. I love the melodies. I just think they had such a good ear for Paul, especially. I think, you know, people go back and forth about who the best songwriter was. Was it John or was it Paul or, you know, George? Some people are George stans and love George's stuff, but I really love Paul, and just, I think he has such a good ear for melody. And I think part of this comes from being the bass player. Just you hear the chords differently when you're a bass player. So I think some of the stuff he comes up with is just really, really beautiful. Some of the chord progressions, like we're going to talk about Hey Jude later, but I just think that's like the most beautiful chord progression ever. It's, yeah. So I love it.
That's a great point about him being a bass player and hearing the notes and the possible notes a little bit differently because of his bass playing. That totally makes sense. I think I don't know where I heard it, because again, there's so many documentaries and shows about the Beatles now. I can't remember where I heard this, but you know, they had to think of stuff that they could remember, because it was not as easy to record stuff. I mean, if you were in the studio, great, but if you were at home or in the car or anywhere else, you couldn't really record what you were doing. And so they had to write stuff that they could remember. So it's catchy, you know?
Yeah. It wasn't like you could pull out your voice notes and be singing in the car or just in your bedroom and, I'm going to pull up GarageBand and, you know, or lay down some tracks in Logic, you know, you got to remember it.
Yeah. So if it wasn't catchy, they wouldn't remember it. So it's almost like every song they wrote was catchy because that's how they could remember it. And, you know, Paul McCartney, his voice, I think, is really underrated. And he's such an incredible singer, and there's so much that he can do vocally. So when you can sing like he can, the options for melodies is broken open wide. There's so much that he could do that the average person just wouldn't be able to even think of because they couldn't sing it, you know?
It's an interesting point you make about having to remember the melodies. And that might be, you know, as a songwriter, whenever I get an idea for a melody, I'm like, I got to write this down. I got to record it, because once it's gone, it's gone. I don't know if you ever had that experience, but in some ways, kind of what you're saying, it could be kind of like a filter for what's good. Like if you can't remember it 10 minutes later, was it really that good of a melody?
Totally.
So
I don't know if they thought of it that way, but I think that's essentially what happened. You know, if they forgot it, then it wasn't good enough.
Yeah. And I love Paul's voice. Like, and he can do some of like the stuff that was kind of more Southern rock tinged, like like Come Together, like I started with, like that stuff fits my voice. So whenever I'm playing cover gigs, I play that stuff. Helter Skelter. Like I love that stuff. That's the stuff that really gets me going. So that's one of the things I really love about them. Now I know this is first of all, other things that you love about them artistically before we get into things that we don't love artistically.
Well, that's a good, I mean, I think the number one thing I think of with the Beatles is they're collaborating. The way that, like, they're a true band in this, and you can really see it in like I think it's Get Back is the documentary I've been watching recently. You can really see their collaboration. They're sitting around writing, and it's not just one person sort of making all the decisions. It's almost like everything has to kind of pass the smell test with everybody. And if an idea doesn't work for one of them, then they keep on working at it until they get it. And, you know, like some of my favorite artists don't operate like that. Like, you know, like I think like two of my favorite artists of all time are John Mayer and Billy Joel. And I think with both of them, although I haven't been in the room while it's happening, I think with both of them, when they're writing or when they're kind of figuring out how a song's going to go, it's probably a lot of them kind of making the final decision. And the Beatles, of course, they're not a solo artist. They're a band. And it's not just that there's a lead singer and then a group of musicians. They were a true band, and they collaborated. And it was probably really hard at times, especially for John and Paul, you know, writing the bulk of the songs, to kind of let your idea die a little bit, sort of take somebody else up on their idea. Like, that collaborative process is not easy. Anybody who's part of a team knows that, but it's also where the genius of the Beatles is. So like, they're collaborating, which is the difficult part, is also what makes them great. Is each one of those songs would not exist the way it does if the guy who maybe first thought of it kept it to himself. But because they collaborated, we got this mix of music that wouldn't have existed any other way. So to me, they are like a shining example of being open to other people's ideas and sort of seeking the best together as a group You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And having been having been one of several songwriters in a band for a while, you know, you bring this thing that you've crafted and you bring it to the band, and it's like, here's my heart, guys. Do you like it? And like, sometimes they're like, yeah, that's awesome. And other times they're like, meh, it's okay. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, right.
You know,
right. Which is horrible when that happens.
Yeah. But it takes a lot of vulnerability, takes a lot of trust, a lot of friendship. So yeah,
totally.
Bands that can make it work. It's awesome. I have a hard time sometimes with the Beatles. They got some weird stuff, man. They got like, I Am the Walrus and Yellow Submarine. I'm the Eggman. Like, there's just, I don't know if they were doing a lot of drugs or if they were just like, hey, we're the biggest thing in the world. Let's see how weird we can get. Or I don't know, but some of that stuff, I just like, I know some people are into it. It's a little out there for me. I like the more mainstream stuff. Maybe that makes me not cool, but yeah.
No, I think your sense is probably right. I think there probably was a healthy amount of drug usage involved in some of them, but honestly, I think more than that, they were so young. I think people forget. I mean, people like me who weren't around when the Beatles were really around, we forget how young they were. I mean, they were kids. And so by the time they are world famous rock stars, they're just sort of figuring themselves out, you know, and they had everything in the world accessible to them. And I think when that happens, especially young to people, they seem to just sort of go, okay, well, I've discovered this, I've played all the way through to its end. What else is there? And so I think they were searching a lot. You know, they spent all that time in India, and they, you know, got into meditation and spiritual practices. And I think sometimes when you open your mind, I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said, open your mind, but not so much that your brain falls out. I think sometimes when you have a really open mind, I think you just get into some weird stuff. And also some of it just seems almost like provocatively fun. Like some of it, I don't even know if it means anything. Sometimes it feels like they're like, dude, we could release a complete nonsense song about nothing and people will listen to it because we're the freaking Beatles. Maybe that's not how they were thinking, but it's what it seems like.
Yeah. Agree. All right, cool. Well, let's get into some of the spiritual themes in the songs. The first song I wanted to talk about, and again, shout out to our friend Jude. I wanted to talk about Hey Jude, which I think is maybe the most beautiful chord progression of all time. So, Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Just remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better. And anytime you feel the pain, hey Jude, refrain. Don't carry the world upon your shoulders. For you know that it's a fool who plays it cool by making his world a little colder. All the seventh chords and the transition from that walk down the anytime you feel the pain, it just flows so beautifully. It's not just the same simple chord progressions you get in most pop music nowadays. I really love it. And then the meaning of the song, I love that it talks about not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it's a fool who plays it cool by making his world a little colder. What do you think he's saying here?
Yeah, it's interesting because this song, I feel like in each of the verses, there's something new for me to kind of think about and remember. I think he's just I think it's a song of encouragement. You know, like when he says, it's a fool who plays it cool by making his world a little colder. It's like sometimes we create misery for ourselves. I think sometimes we actually make things more difficult. We make our world a little bit more hostile. We're hostile to ourselves. We kind of hate on ourselves. We're kind of needlessly hostile. We take out our own junk on the people around us. And I think like every situation we walk into, we have an opportunity to make it better or worse, you know? So it's like the world's going to be tough on you. You're going to have bad days, but don't compound them by making worse things worse. Try to make things better. And then like I think it's an encouragement to not wait for somebody else to sort of like show you the way or pick you up, but to just kind of keep marching forward. Like in the last part, I think he says, So let it out and let it in. Hey, Jude, just begin. Or hey, Jude, begin. You're waiting for someone to perform with, but don't you know that it's just you? Hey, Jude, you'll do. The movement you need is on your shoulder. For me, it's just the whole thing is just this encouragement. Like, don't wait for anybody else to perform with in that respect. I don't know whether he's talking about like, in a couple or just, like for me, I'm a big collaborator. But I find myself sometimes pausing, waiting for like someone to team up with so I can go do the right thing. And he's like, the movement you need is on your shoulder. You've got what it takes. You've got to decide. You're kind of not the creator of your own destiny, but you've got to decide when you're going to go for it, and if you want to make your world a better place, it starts with you. That's what I take from it. A lot of times I take things from songs that the artist never intended, but that's just how my brain works.
Yeah, no, that's fun. That's how my brain works too. And I'm a firm believer that like the author of the song doesn't own the authoritative interpretation, like that the song means what the song means, and it can be a little more open-ended. So yeah, I love what you said there about how we don't have to wait on somebody else either when we're going through pain and we want to feel better. Like sometimes we can take it out kind of in anger. I mean, maybe you do this. I would never do this, of course, but I would never take out my bad day on somebody else, especially somebody I care about. No, I think we all do that. But I think that's one part. But then sometimes if you're not that sort of person who takes it out on other people, in a like an outward expressive way, like you get mean or nasty, sometimes you can take it out on the other person internally by the way you're thinking about them inside.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Like you can be like thinking they didn't do this for me. I do this for them. When this happens, I'm always there. I'm always the person that calls. I'm always the person who remembers their birthday. I do this and then they don't do this, of course. And then they can have this whole list of things that they do that you don't do. But if we are relying on somebody else to make ourselves whole, to make ourselves feel better, we're always going to fall short, right? Because only God can really, really fill that. But at the same time, I see in this song a call to not just encouragement, but also vulnerability. Because he says, you found her, go out and get her. Remember to let her into your heart. Right. Like you've got to kind of let down your walls. Like, it's not that you can't go to other people for help, right? You can go to other people for help, but you can't put it all on them. Like they're not responsible for your happiness, either by not annoying you or by being able to read your mind and know your needs automatically. Like, I think, that comes from like a healthy prayer life and healthy emotional life and sorting those things out. And then you can go to another person in vulnerability and say, in a non-threatening way, not, hey, you didn't do this for me, but like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And the kind of the key to this song for me is anytime you feel the pain, hey, Jude, refrain. Being an English major, I know the fancy word for this. That's a contronym, when a word has two different meanings that are also opposite meanings. Because what does it mean to refrain? If you refrain from something, it means you stop it, right? You're not doing it. But refrain can also mean to repeat doing it and keep doing it. So when you feel the pain, refrain, meaning like stop, but also like keep doing, like kind of sit in that pain. You got to kind of work it out a little bit yourself. And so that when you go to another person, if you go to another person, you can go in a way that's not, where you're not just like this anger ball or this insecurity ball, right? You can go and be like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I need. And I think, that's kind of a psychological truth, but it's also, I think, a spiritual truth, because Jesus tells us you can't serve both God and man, right? Like we got to find our hope and our encouragement first in God. And then other people can help us, right? But if we go to other people expecting them to be God, right, and expecting that they're gonna be, if we're serving their expectations or we think they're gonna fulfill everything in us, then not only is that a disservice to them, it's not gonna fulfill our needs in the first place. So I think anytime you feel the pain, you got to refrain. You got to stop for a minute and then refrain. Sit in it, pray about it, take it to God, and then you're in a place where you could go to another person in vulnerability and let her into your heart. So
the way you said it is so clear and it makes it sound simple, but I know exactly what you mean. I mean, and it's not easy, right? But it is kind of simple in the sense that we're supposed to trust God. What's that quote? work as if everything depends on you, but pray as if everything depends on God. Something like that. I think that is kind of it's when you sum it up into a little quote, it's like, oh, okay, that's a cute little thing. But actually, I think that's the trick, I think, is to take the weight upon your shoulders, in the sense that you wake up with a drive, with a mission, with a vision. You feel like you've been tasked with something, like you have a responsibility, and taking that seriously, taking your role in the world seriously, taking your role in the kingdom of God seriously, but at the same time, not taking yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
You know, like in that first part, when you first asked me, about that chorus line, as soon as you said the line, what is it? I think, don't carry the world on your shoulders. Don't carry the world upon your shoulders. To me, that's like that's the sentiment of the song. Like, you gotta give it your all. You gotta try. You gotta work hard at this thing. You can't be lazy about it. You can't be apathetic about it. But at the same time, don't let the stress and the anxiety and the pressure cause you to get off track. Like, and so there's that fine line of like how to really try, but not to try so hard that it cripples you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And depending on what sort of person you are, and depending on where you are in your life, you might need the message that says like, hey, God's got this. Pray as if it all depends on God. Or you might be in a place in your life where you're kind of apathetic, and you might need to be like, look, work like it all depends on you. And that, I think, is the value of, one, a prayer life, but two, a church community, and like wise spiritual mentors, going to confession, having a spiritual director, having people that you're praying with and talking to deeply about spiritual things that are going on, because a lot of times other people are able to name that in you, and you might be beating yourself up because you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, but somebody else can say, hey, like, look, God's got this. Or you might be the sort of person that's like, oh, it'll be fine. And one of your friends might be able to like, I mean, it will be fine. God's got it all. But like, really, you need to pay your taxes, you know?
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah, when we get into isolation, we get in trouble. We need people
Absolutely.
to speak into our lives, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So listeners, if you're one of those people that you've been struggling to find a church community or some spiritual friends, I really encourage you, like, that is a place where such growth happens. And it can take some work to find a place where you feel comfortable, to find a place that's welcoming. I know I've definitely been a part of some church communities that have not been so welcoming and been kind of toxic, but when the church is doing the church well, like, oh man, does it help us to grow? And, yeah, I mean, that's by and large been my experience of church, but I know it hasn't been everybody's. So speaking of that, I wanted to get into this next song, which is kind of on that topic. So, what would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? So lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Yeah, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody? I want somebody to love. That is such a fun little song. And who does the version that's like a real slow and bluesy and 3/4? It was like the Wonder Years theme. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
I'm trying to remember. Is it Bob Seger? Or, I forget. But there's a really good like kind of bluesy cover of this song, which is just so melancholy and very, very different than the happy-go-lucky Beatles version.
Yeah, actually, I know this is not exactly what we're talking about right now, but it reminds me of something really interesting about the Beatles that I always think about, which is sometimes the Beatles covers are, in my opinion, better than the original song, which might be sacrilege to say. I realize that, but I think I don't mean it in a bad way. I just think they were so prolific with so many songs that they wrote songs that I think sometimes the covers I hear, I'm like, whoa, I didn't realize this song had that much in it, which I think is the mark of a great song.
Yeah, a lot. Same. I always say that about Bob Dylan. Like, I feel like a lot of Bob Dylan songs are better when they're covered by Adele or U2 or something, or Jimi Hendrix, something like that. So.
Yeah, and again, I don't know. We may be outcast for saying that, but that's how I feel.
Yeah. All right. So talking about the value of friendship, I feel like just even within this past summer, I have been kind of renewed in my awareness of just how important good friends are. Like, you know, I've been married for a while. I've been married 10 years. I got kids, I got a career, I got a job, I got, you know, family that's close. And I think it's easy in someone in my state of life to kind of drift from my friends that I knew in college or knew when I was younger, or out when I was playing in bands and clubs every weekend. And I've really become aware of just how important those friendships are. Even though I have these like close family ties and, you know, a good marriage and all those sorts of things. So let's talk about friendship a little bit. Do you have some good friends you've kept in touch with through the years, or what does friendship look in your life right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just at a wedding a couple of weeks ago of one of my old friends from elementary school. And, you know, we've kept in touch, but we got like the whole crew back together. And it was so weird because we were sitting there in this room before the wedding, all catching up. And, you know, it's when you see somebody who you haven't seen in 2 years or 5 years or even 10 years, but this is like, you know, we hadn't seen each other, some of us, in 20 years. Like the last time we saw each other, I was like, you know, riding my bike around the neighborhood or something. And it was just so great to get there. There were things that came back to us instantly. I mean, there were little subtle references to little inside jokes that somebody would make. And I'm like, wow, 20 years later, I know exactly what he means by that. And there is something really therapeutic and just sweet about that. So you can't deny the value of good friendship. And it is harder as you get older. Anytime you move out of one season and into the next, it's harder to keep up with friends. And for me, I find that the people I'm friends with are the people I'm around, which is difficult because I travel a lot. And so, especially over the last several years, being on the road full time, I end up becoming friends with the people who I see on the road. So there are people who live in different states and even different countries who they end up being the people close to me. Those are the people I have something in common with, we keep in touch with. And then when I'm home, which is in either Nashville or Florida, we kind of split our time. And when I'm in either of those places, it's like usually Sarah and I's number one priority is, all right, we're going to be in Nashville next week. We got to schedule to see some people, because you got to be intentional with it. You know, once you're not in college and you're not hanging around the dorm anymore, you're not just going to hang out with people by accident. You know, you actually have to try.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And I really love what you said about being like meeting up with old elementary school friends. And even though you haven't seen each other in 20 years, like there's something that connects you. And I feel like in my life, there's kind of like two camps that my friends fall into is, you know, I've been working in Catholic ministry my entire adult life. I'm very involved at our church. So pretty much all of my new friends almost are exclusively Catholic, and like not just Catholic, but like super Catholic. Like they're running they're running the parish programs, you know, they're Catholic speakers and musicians like I am, you know, they're running a podcast or something like that. Like their ministry is what they do. But I also have my friends that I like grew up with, and like, we don't live in the same place for the most part anymore. We don't have the same religion necessarily. We don't have the same political views. We don't have like I have a friend, like the time we catch up is like whenever there's like a new Supreme Court nominee, and like he like calls me up to like talk about it, you know, because he needs to like flesh it out and sort it out with somebody who like thinks a little bit differently than him. And like I love that. And there's something to that shared history, because I think it's good to have, you know, I think it's good to have the support of friends who are like-minded, can support you in your spiritual walk, and you can go to with spiritual questions and can pray with you and pray for you. And like, I think it's good to surround yourself with those people. But I also think there can be like too much of like a Catholic bubble. You know what I mean? Totally. And I think it can be really good to like have some atheist friends, have some Jewish friends, have some Buddhist and Muslim friends, like to, you know, just some secular friends, some people that aren't involved in anything really. And I recognize like the common humanity there. And I think that's good for us, but it's also the gospel call to like be friends with these people and love them as Christ would love them. And you know, not compromise your values.
I find that most of my friends right now, most of the friends I really spend my day to day with, I don't even know if most of them are Catholic. The common theme with people I end up being friends with is I can be myself around them. You know, if I can't be myself around somebody, it's very, very unlikely that we're actually going to be friends. And so unfortunately, at least recently, it's felt like a lot of my a lot of my, not even just my Catholic friends, but just a lot of my religious friends, things are so tense. There's so many issues everybody's so tense about. And even my non-religious friends, the ones who are super tense and you can't say one little thing wrong, I find myself not really spending a lot of time with those people. I find myself spending time with people who I could say something really honest to, and I know I'm going to get a thoughtful response, not like a judgmental kind of reaction. You know what I mean? And that, unfortunately, too many people, I think, aren't around people who they can really say what they feel around, you know, and still be like welcomed and loved.
Yeah, I think part of that is like social media is we're still friends with people, but we're like in the same room with them. And I noticed an interesting phenomenon is one of my buddies that he loves to talk politics with me for some reason. I'm not like super into politics, but for some reason he always wants to talk about it with me. If we're in the same place, like having a beer, I'm over at his house, he's over at my house, and we talk about politics and we totally disagree and we're like going back and forth. At the end of the day, I feel like closer to him because we had it out, you know? But if we had that same interaction online, chatting back and forth in a comment box, I would feel like distant.
Yeah, no chance.
So there's so much of that I think is due to social media, but something that, like you said, that I think is part of this first verse here. What would you think if I sang at a tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Are you going to be judgmental? Are you going to let me be me? Are you going to be like conditional love or unconditional love? And I think you're right. Unfortunately, a lot of times in Catholic circles, I was just talking to a friend the other day who listens to the show, and she was like, she's not Catholic, but she was saying, you know, I know a lot of you Catholics. I know you're not like this, Mike, but there's this guilt, and just everything is about you do the thing, and if you don't do the thing, you're bad, and if you do the thing, you're good. You just got to obey, and there's just all these rules and all this Catholic guilt, and the message that comes across is God has conditional love, right? He only loves you if. And of course, God calls us to live the gospel and to live compassionate, virtuous lives. But I think a lot of times unwittingly, because we have that judgmental attitude, we tell people that our church and really our God is a God of conditional love who only loves you if, right? So I think you hit the nail right on the head. Yeah, no, I think, and
it fits so perfectly with what the Beatles did sort of in their own songwriting, is like they were collaborating, you know, there is so much beauty and goodness and truth in the world. Of course, you know, if we believe that, that God is goodness and beauty and truth itself, right? So, you know, he is love itself, right? And God is in everybody. So there is goodness and truth and beauty in everybody. And I think if we're not open to it in other people, we're missing part of the picture, you know? So I don't know. It's easy to say that. It's a whole nother thing to live it out. But I just think you got to have your convictions and you got to pursue truth, but you also got to delight in other people, even in their quirks and even in their weird opinions. I just think if we can't delight in other people need to be delighted in. I mean, I know I do. You know what I mean? So if all I ever feel is judged, I'm not going to want to spend a lot of time around you, you know?
Well, I think you're delightful, Dom. So there you go. I love what you said about meeting people and delighting them, because that's what Jesus did, right? He's like, hey, Samaritan woman, let's have a talk. Like, hey, tax collector, I'm coming to your house tonight, you know? And everyone's like, Jesus, what are you doing? Do you know who he is? Do you know who she is? And then he's like, yeah, we're going to dinner. Come on. We can all come, you know? So and again, not that Jesus was, you know, permissive of sin. He calls people to repentance, but the first thing he does is just what you say. He delights them. Like, he meets them and he loves them first. Right.
Yeah.
So I have this quote from St. John Paul II that I use in, I feel like, every other episode, but it says, man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it. And if we cut ourselves off and we're just like, all right, I'm in Catholic world with, you know, my little sect of Catholics who think the exact same way I do, or my same set of people that think the exact same way I do, we are denying people not just love, but like comprehension of their own lives, right? Like, when we love people, we are making the world make more sense for them. Right. And when we participate in love, it just makes the world make more sense. You know, when we say that the world is senseless, what do we mean? It means we look around and it's like, why is it like this? Why are people treating themselves this way? Like, love makes the world and makes ourselves make sense.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's why love one another was such a central command. You know, like when Jesus says, I have a new command for you, I think that's sort of the intention there. Sorry, my alarm is, my house may be getting broken into. I'm not positive, but we're going to carry on with the show. If I disappear, you know why.
Right.
I think when he says, I have a new command for you, you know, it's like we kind of skip over that, right? But the word new for us is just sort of a casual kind of slightly updated, a little bit better than the last version. But the original, you know, kind of, if you look at the Greek, you look at the Hebrew, the word that he's using there, new, is more like revolutionary or groundbreaking. So he's like, I have this revolutionary, groundbreaking command for you. I have this command that's going to change everything. And you can imagine they're thinking, well, this is the guy who multiplied, you know, the loaves and fish, and he walked on water, and he cast out demons. And now he's saying he's got something that's really going to change everything. So they're thinking like, whatever is coming next is going to be the most incredible thing. And then he says, love one another. That was this big groundbreaking thing he wanted to share with them. And I don't think that that's just kind of a nice little Hallmark Christian, you know, postcard. I think it's the most radical thing we can do, to be love to one another, knowing that who among us is really capable of being of loving unconditionally, and who among us is really worthy of being loved unconditionally. And yet we have to do it anyway. It's the way we're loved by God, and it's the way that he wants us to love others. So it would be great if everybody could experience the fullness of God in their own personal prayer life. But for most people, they're going to need somebody from the outside treating them like Jesus, you know?
Dude, preach, brother. Preach. That is so good. That is so good. What it reminds me of, you know, that love is revolutionary. It reminds me of that verse where Jesus says, you know, if the disciples say to him, you know, Jesus, Lord, increase our faith. And he's like, all you need is faith the size of a mustard seed. And you could like tell that tree to get up and go into the sea. And we hear that and we think, oh, if I just believed harder, if I was just had fewer doubts or certainty in my head. But what is faith? It's not just like how certain you are, but it is acting even when you're uncertain. And like those daily acts of love, if we just are faithful to those daily acts of love, like that's what's going to move a mountain. Right? By his grace. It's not something we can do on our own. It needs to be steeped in prayer and the sacraments and the community. That's how we're fueled up. But it's those daily acts of loving people, loving our neighbor. That's what's revolutionary. I love it. I love it. I never knew that about the Greek and the Latin and the Hebrew or whatever you said, but that's really cool.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard that. I definitely don't know the Greek and Hebrew myself, but I read it from somebody I trust, I guess.
Awesome. Good. All right. Well, speaking of faith, I wanted to go into probably my favorite Beatles song all the way around. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. In my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. So, when they ask Paul McCartney about this song, he talks about how he had a dream one time about, you know, he's going through a hard time. He had a dream of his mother who had passed away, and his mother just saying, let it be, let it be, let it be. And so his mom's name was Mary. And so speaking of Mother Mary, I went on a retreat in college with a Franciscan friar. I'm all about the Franciscans. I've been in with like 3 different brands of Franciscans at different times of my life. My spiritual director's a Franciscan, but nice. On this retreat, it was all about Marian spirituality. And he played this song and he's like, do you know where the phrase let it be comes from? It comes from the Gospel of Luke. When the angel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, you know, blessed are you, blessed is the fruit of your womb. You know, a son will be born to you and we'll name him Emmanuel and he will be Jesus. And Mary asks, well, how can this be? You know, I haven't been with a man. And Gabriel explains, you know, the power of the Holy Spirit will come over you. And what is Mary's response? Mary's response says, behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to your word. And in Latin, the word is fiat, and it literally translates to like, let it be. And so somewhere in the back of Paul McCartney's mind, I think, this is one of like the great famous phrases of scripture is what is the wisdom of Mary? The wisdom of Mary is even when things seem crazy, even when an angel appears out of the sky and tells you, young teenage girl, that even though you haven't had sex, you're going to be pregnant, and not just pregnant, but pregnant with like the savior of the world. What is her response? Even though she's like bewildered and questioning, how can this be? Her response is, let it be. Like, if it's God's will, let it be. Even if it's hard, let it be. And that's why I wore this shirt today. Actually got this at NCYC last year. I bought it for my wife, so it's a little tight on me. But I wanted to wear it anyway. And it's got Mary, the M at the foot of the cross, and it's got the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary on it down there below. I don't know how well you can see it, but so often when I find myself in times of trouble, or I'm in a world of brokenhearted people, I turn to the words of Mary. I turn to her fiat and say, you know what, Lord, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know what's going on right now. It's confusing. I don't know how this can be, but if this is your will, let it be done to me according to your word. And just kind of trusting that it's going to bear fruit in the same way that Mary bore fruit. So this song, like, I don't know, it like cuts straight to my heart. Sometimes I can't even play it without like tearing up. It's like, yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, I love that, man. I love that you said that, because it probably is one of the most sort of true sentiments. And it's like you said, you know, he wasn't explicitly talking about the Mother Mary we think of when we say those words, Mother Mary. But just because he wasn't writing this for Catholic podcasts to dissect, I think he was, Dom. I think he was. Yeah, he may have been doing us a favor. But to me, it's actually more beautiful that he wasn't, because truth is universal.
Yes.
You know, and so like the sentiment of this to there will be an answer. Like, there will be an answer. Like, God is at work, and you know, truth will prevail, goodness will prevail. I think that's just like a really important sentiment for us to have hope. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because if truth isn't going to prevail, if there won't be an answer, if the night will remain cloudy forever, if the light will never shine again, then there would be no reason for hope. You know, so I think being people of hope is exactly that, to basically live out the sentiment of this song. I think that's what it is to be people of hope.
Yeah, those refrains, speaking words of wisdom, whisper words of wisdom, there will be an answer. Like, man, how deeply do I need to hear those words sometimes when I'm going through stuff? Just like, hey, let it be. There will be an answer, you know? And then there comes a day where you wake up to the sound of music and like, things have gotten better, you know, and then ultimately one day there will, you know, when we get to go home to Jesus, there will be that day we wake up to the sound of music and it's on a whole another level. But even in this life, there is consolation and there is hope, and we don't have to live with suffering all the time. At the very end, it even says, there will be no sorrow. Let it be. Shine until tomorrow. Even when the night is cloudy, there's still a light that shines on me. And I think, yeah, that's such an image of hope. It's just like that little star, like piercing through the darkness. There's still a light.
Yes. Yeah. I think hope is essentially the belief that things will get better. That's, and so if you, I know what it's like, and I'm going to be honest with you, like over the last couple of years, especially when the pandemic first got going and all of our work kind of dried up, you know, we weren't speaking, we weren't doing music anywhere. And for a little while, it was really grim there. And I'm not going to lie. It's so easy to talk about this stuff, but dude, I totally lost my sense of hope. And you know, you can ask people who know me really well. It was like I sort of became like a shell of myself, to be honest. And the thing that was missing was my hope. You know, it's like, I mean, I still had food to eat. You know, I had a roof over my head. My wife, we were both healthy and happy, and we were together. And there's a lot to be thankful for. But I just lost this sense of hope. I lost this sense of something to look forward to. And I think you need something to look forward to. You know, so for some of us, it's like, oh, we have a concert we're going to next week, but more, I think more ultimately for all of us, we're hoping that there is redemption. You know what I mean? At some point.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Cause I know, I mean, we all go through that. I feel like I've shared a couple times on this show before. I feel like this past summer has been like a rough time for me. And there's been times where it's hard to hope, you know? And, yeah. So thanks for sharing that. I think COVID for a lot of people was an experience of that, but everybody has their thing. Sometimes I feel like, when I was first kind of getting into the spiritual life in college, and I was discerning whether I was going to be a priest or whether I was going to, marry my college girlfriend and all that sort of thing, I felt like God kind of hit me over the head with this trust 2x4. It's like, look, you got to trust me. Look, you got to trust me. Look, you got to trust me. And then I kind of got through that time and I was like, now I know how to trust God. But then like every few years, God needs to pull out the trust 2x4 because I get complacent, I get complacent with the things in this world and the way my life is going. And we need that reminder that like, no, it's not the things of this world that we need to place our hope in. That's the sort of person I am anyway. When things are going well, I often forget to pray and I often forget to be close to God. But when things are terrible, when things are crap, I'm like, man, I got holy hours. I'm going to confession. I'm like reading my daily devotions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I know some people are the other way. My wife is the opposite way. Like when she's in a bad place, it's really hard for her to pray. But when she's like good to go, like so we kind of hold each other accountable in a little bit like that. But different people are different ways.
Yeah. Well, no, and I appreciate you sharing that as well, because I think we have a tendency sometimes in like Christian public life to act like it's all good all the time. And everybody knows that's a lie. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we're not fooling anybody. The Psalms, for example, are full of songs of lament. Like it's not all good all the time. Yeah. And, being a person of faith doesn't mean you never have worries or anxieties. You know what I mean? So, like there's a reason we keep one of my favorite TV shows is West Wing.
Nice. And
there's a line where they're talking about this. It might be like a certain policy they're pushing out or something. And somebody says, well, you're kind of preaching to the choir. Why are you preaching to the choir? And the character Toby in the show, he says, well, that's how you get them to sing. And so it's like, even for those of us who might consider ourselves in the choir or who might, might be perceived by other people as being in the choir, we still need to be preached to. There's a reason you preach to the choir. It's how you get them to sing. And when the choir is singing, then then the rest of the church joins in and sings ideally. Yeah. So I just think that message is important for people, especially in the church and in ministry, to hear like, hey, it's not all going to be good all the time. You're going to hit rough patches. That's exactly where songs like this can come in and help you out,
Yeah. And to bring it back to Mary, I mean, Mary, she did not have an easy life. She did not have like a trial-free life. I always love as a teacher and somebody who worked with, teenagers a lot. The only story we have of Jesus as an adolescent is when he gets lost in the temple. And what does Mary say to him when she finds him? She says, "My son, you have filled us with great anxiety." Like even teenage Jesus filled his parents with great anxiety.
Right.
But what does Mary do every step of the way? It says this in the Gospel of Luke. Every time there's something confusing or difficult, what does Mary do? It says, and Mary took these things and she pondered them in her heart. And so for me, like, again, that's a lesson from the Blessed Mother is when I find myself in times of trouble, let it be, ponder them in my heart, bring them back to the Lord and have that hope that, there's still a light that shines on me, even though right now it's hard for me to hope. There's still a light.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Amen.
All right. So we're coming down close to the end here. You mentioned before we started filming that you love the Beatles song "Yesterday." Do you want to tell us a little bit about that song and why?
Yeah.
It's so special?
It's interesting because it's kind of an interesting song in a couple of different ways. I think for Beatles fans, if you're old enough to be remembering when the song came out, that's a different story. You remember it especially well then. But even listening back, it's a very different song. First of all, the band isn't really playing on the song, and I remember hearing Paul McCartney say that when he brought it to the rest of the band and had like a little bit of a demo going. The rest of the band was like, I don't really know what to do on this. Like, I don't know what to add. It sort of seems good as it is. And so it was kind of just an acoustic song. And it's a little bit of that kind of ballad and they were a rock and roll band, So I remember hearing that the producer wanted to add like a maybe an orchestra to it, or maybe even like just a string quartet. And Paul McCartney was like, no way, we're not doing strings. We're a rock and roll band, but the producer was like, well, just try it. And so, they just tried it and he ended up liking it. So you can hear the strings if you listen to the song now. But it's kind of a sad song. It's a song about love being lost, you know. And I also remember hearing that Paul McCartney says that he doesn't really remember actively thinking of this song. It sort of came to him in a dream, which is sort of a theme. I know that's happened with him with other songs as well. But he said this song came to him sort of in a dream, and he woke up like humming it and thinking it was already a song, thinking it must be somebody else's song, because he knew he didn't try to write it. And so he started sharing it with people like, hey, what's that song? And nobody could remember what song it was. So it just turned out that he had kind of written this, you know, in his sleep, which is crazy considering it's, you know, gone on to become one of the most famous songs ever. But it's a sad song.
Super sad,
you know, but it's also like just yearning for yesterday, which is, it's sort of the opposite of like the hope we were just talking about. You know, it's sort of like yearning for yesterday, but I also think it's very real. And what I mean by that is when I hear it, I'm reminded of like, well, we all do have a yesterday. You know, we all have lost things, and loss is a part of life. And you kind of just have to figure out how to keep going and how to, I think that's where hope comes in, to hope for the future. Because if your trust is in the past, well, it's in the past. And in some ways the past is gone, you know, and the things of the past are gone. So you might even wrestle with it. Like in the bridge, you know, he says, why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say, but I said something wrong, and now I long for yesterday. So I think we've all made mistakes. You know, we all kind of, in some ways, live in the wreckage of our own sort of misdeeds or our own mistakes, or, you know, places we wandered off the path. We all have to carry those things. But then there's hope. There's hope to keep moving on. So it's a sad song, but I think sometimes those songs, even though it's not like it resolves in the happiest way ever, sometimes that's really important to, like you said, to be vulnerable and to just share something that's a little bit sad. And for me, this song is that, but in a good way.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's two lessons we can that come to mind for me. Is one, that when we say hope, it doesn't mean push all the grief out of the way, ignore it, you know, shove it under the rug. Like, you kind of got to dwell there. You got to sit with it in prayer and talk to some people. Like you gotta sit with it for a while and really feel it. And that's how you process it. You know, Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn. But also there can be something hopeful about looking to the happiness of the past. You know, you don't want to get stuck there, but how many times in the scriptures does it say, remember what God has done for you? Remember the wonders he worked in the land of Egypt. Remember, you know, look to the ages past. Has anyone trusted in the Lord and been forgotten? That's from Sirach chapter 2. Like, so there is a value, one, in sitting in the grief and really feeling it and letting God into that. And two, to looking to the past for encouragement. Because if God brought you through it before, he can bring you through it again. But I think you're right. It's important not to get like stuck there. So, but I love that song. I first got to know that song. I was in a choir in high school, an all men's choir. We did the Boys to Men version. You were talking about great covers of Beatles songs. That's a great cover of a Beatles song. We did like the acapella version. It was super, super fun. So,
I hope there's a video of that on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, no, it was pre YouTube. So,
that's awesome. Yeah, you're exactly right about that. It's like yesterday happened, it's real, but there's hope for tomorrow. I mean, you know, to use that theme of the day, is like we have to find joy and peace today in some way, but there's hope for tomorrow, you know, so we can't get stuck in yesterday.
Amen. All right, Dom. Well, I promised our listeners that by the end of this episode, we would be able to give them some takeaways for how to live the gospel today. So I'm wondering if there's just one thing that we've talked about that is kind of like your gospel takeaway, your gospel challenge for how do we live these messages in our life? Is there one thing that stood out to you from what we talked about?
Yeah. I mean, I think the two things that we sort of accidentally focused on were trusting in God and loving other people. So for me, I think it's that the gospel says love one another. Those are direct words from the gospel. Love one another, and it's like he could have said, "I have a new commandment for you. This is really, really important. Make sure you tell everybody what's right and wrong." That it just wasn't. It just wasn't his primary command. It's not that it's not important, but it's like, first and foremost, love one another. I think that is the secret, is we're supposed to love one each other. We're supposed to be kind and gracious to one another. We're supposed to respect each other. We're supposed to try to see the good in each other. I think that is a miracle when that happens. You know, Mother Teresa said, it is Christmas morning every time you let God love somebody through you. It is Christmas morning. And it's just like, well, what does she mean by that? I think Christmas morning, that it's the happiest, of course, in the ideal sense, right? When you're opening all your presents with your family and everything. I know that's not everybody's reality, but Christmas morning is like this fulfillment of a promise. It's the Savior has come. It's light has come. It's joy has come. The waiting is over. The night is over. There's celebration. And that's what Mother Teresa said happens every time you let God love somebody through you. So for me, it's love one another. That's kind of the drum I'm beating right now.
Awesome. Very cool. And the one that stuck with me most is when the night is cloudy, there's still a light that shines on me. There will be an answer. And so for me, the next time I'm going through something tough, I'm going to try to be like Mary, ponder these things in my heart and just say, Lord, I trust you. Let it be done to me according to your word. I am your servant. So that's going to be my takeaway. Dom, I often ask my guests if they would close us in prayer. Would you lead us in a prayer, kind of reflecting on some of these things we've talked about?
Sure, of course.
Absolutely. All right. So listeners, wherever you are, take a moment, take a breath, close your eyes unless you're driving, and let's join together in prayer.
Come, Holy Spirit. Come, Lord Jesus. We just put ourselves in your presence. We just stop for a moment and pause to reflect on your goodness, on your love for us, on your invitation to us to be holy, to be saints, on your command to us to love one another. We think about your providence, about how your hand is always working in our lives, that you're always working for our good, that you love us. We take a moment to just remember how loved we are, that we are truly beloved. And we let that encourage us and inspire us to have faith even when things don't seem to be going to plan. We just are inspired by that, to have faith that the sun will shine again even when it's cloudy. And so we just ask for help casting our anxieties upon you, because that's hard to do. It's hard to let go of our anxieties and our stresses and our worries. And so we just ask for the courage to be able to cast them on you. And just to free up room in our lives for trust and for unconditional love. So, Lord, we just ask for the grace to not only receive that from you, but to also share that with other people. And we thank you for the work that Mike and his team are doing with this great podcast, that it would continue to bless many people and to reach many people. And we also just thank you for pop culture, as weird and beautiful and crazy as it is, that you shine in the midst of all of it, and that truth is there to be found everywhere. So we ask you to bless Mike and his team as they continue this awesome journey as well. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son,
Thank you, Dom, for being here. Tell if the people want to find you and know more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, man. I guess right now, I think Instagram is probably where I'm most active. I haven't been tweeting as much just because I'm trying to not poison my life. But I am on Instagram at Dom Quaglia Jr. I guess I'm on YouTube and TikTok and everywhere else, but that's probably the main place. And I have a kind of a weird last name. So if you look it up, you'll probably find me, or one of my cousins in Italy or something.
And we'll put links in the show notes and everything. So if you want to find Dom, please go follow him. Thank you so much for being on the show, for your wisdom and for your ministry. God bless you and Sarah and all that you're doing. And
thanks, buddy.
Thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise on the Beatles. And listeners, thank you so much for being with us. Once again, this has been Pop Culture Catechism, the gospel according to pop music. My name is Mike Tenney. You can find more about me at miketenneymusic.com or at popculturecatechism.com, where you can also go if you want to become a patron of the show and help the show to run. As a patron, you get access to exclusive content. So for example, every episode gets exclusive content. So for this episode, I'm actually going to play some Beatles songs, and I'm going to do that as the exclusive content for this show. So you'll get some music from me doing Beatles songs. But you also get all the talks that I do in my speaking ministry. I throw all those up there, and also access to other exclusive Awaken stuff. All of that can be found through the Awaken Catholic app. The Awaken Catholic app is a free app for everyone. It's got an awesome Catholic and Christian music library. It's got a Catholic prayer library. It's trilingual in English and Spanish and Latin. It's got a great Catholic Christian community that tries to avoid some of the toxicity you might find on some other social media sites that we won't mention. And then it's also a hub for all the shows. And then, of course, if you are a patron, you get access to all the exclusive content we just talked about. Thank you to all our patrons, but especially Brett Hayden, Darlene and Jay McCaffrey, Carl and Melissa Gore, Lisa and Bob Tenney, Steve and Maggie Hubbard, and Tom and Emily Cambariati. Thank you, Dom. We love you guys, and we will see you next time.